Alright then, it's time to take a look at the history of Germany. But in under 10 minutes because I have a plane to catch. So let's get started. Before we can talk about the German Empire or Nazi Germany, we first have to talk about the very first inhabitants of this land. And those people were called the Germans. Not the Germanic people. The Germans are a group of people who have lived along the Elbe River for many years. But no one really knows where they came from or how they got there. But historians believe that they may have come from either Denmark or Poland. Oh, and by the way, these Germans did not live in one single place. They were actually divided into hundreds of small chieftains and tribes. Now, most of these tribes had names that ended in "berg," which means fortified settlement in Old German. For example, there was the Carusi, the Chatti, and the Swabi. Now, some of the tribes included the Goths, the Vandals, and the Lombards, who would go on to invade Rome. And you know what? These people weren't just sitting around in their fortresses all day. They were going out and doing stuff. For example, in 09 AD, the Marcomannians, along with other Germanic tribes, went and beat up the Romans in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. In fact, they beat them so badly that Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius never went back to Germania and instead wrote this book called Meditations while drinking his chamomile tea. Now, after the Roman Empire fell, these Germanic people began to migrate into Roman territory, establishing their own kingdoms. In fact, in 496, Clovis I converted to Christianity and established the Merovingian dynasty, which would rule over the Franks until 751. Now, during the Middle Ages, this area would be ruled by various people, including the Holy Roman Empire, which wasn't holy, wasn't Roman, and wasn't an empire, but I guess it was German. Anyways, during this time, the various German states were constantly fighting each other for power. But in 1495, they finally decided to stop being a bunch of selfish pricks and signed the Treaty of Constantinople, which established the Holy Roman Empire, But this treaty didn't last very long, because in 1521, Martin Luther kicked off the Protestant Reformation, which caused the whole region to be a battleground between Catholics and Protestants. And I'm sure that you can imagine that a war between Catholics and Protestants would be pretty damn bloody. And it was. It was called the Schmalkaldic Wars, and it lasted from 1546 to 1555. In the end, the Catholics won, but the peace treaty was so vague that basically everyone could interpret it however they wanted. Thus the Peace of Augsburg. But unfortunately for the region, after this peace treaty was signed, the 30 Years' War broke out in 1618, which devastated the entire region. After the war, the German states became a little bit more centralized under the rule of the House of Brandenburg, who also ruled over Prussia. And thus, the German Confederation was born in 1815. The main goal of this confederation was to keep France from ever invading Germany again. Because if you don't know, Napoleon once invaded Germany, and it didn't end well for him, like at all. He was exiled to an island. Meanwhile, in the Italian peninsula, there was a guy named Giuseppe Mazzini, who was kind of like the love child of a tailor and a revolutionary. He made a thing called the Carbonari, which was a secret society dedicated to overthrowing the Austrians and creating a unified Italy. But this didn't work, so he tried again in 1848 and failed again, and then he died. Meanwhile, in Germany, there was this dude named Otto von Bismarck, who was the Prime Minister of Prussia and wanted to unify Germany under Prussian domination. And he accomplished this in 1871 by beating the Austrians at the Battle of Caron-Sebes, defeating France at the Battle of Sedan, and kicking everyone out of the German Confederation. Bismarck also created something called the Kulturkampf, which was a series of laws designed to make Catholics stop having so much power in German society. And it was kind of successful. Now, after Bismarck left office in 1890, Kaiser Wilhelm II took over, and he was probably the worst German leader since the guy who wrote Meditations. First of all, he went to Britain and told them that they needed to stop being a naval power, because clearly Germany was going to be the naval power from now on. Then he fired his foreign secretary, who was pretty upset about it. And then he went and visited the man who started the whole Protestant Reformation and said that he should have finished the job. So needless to say, things weren't looking too hot for Germany. Then World War I rolled around and everything changed. After the war, Germany was in shambles. Their economy was destroyed, their people were starving, and their colonies were gone. But out of the ashes rose the Weimar Republic, which was a democracy, which was cool but also very fragile. And the only thing keeping it together was the threat of communism. Now, while this republic was failing, there was a dude named Adolf Hitler who was attending art school. But then he couldn't get into art school, so he joined the military and fought in World War I, and when that ended, he joined a political party called the German Workers' Party, which he eventually took over and renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And you can call him whatever you want, but I'm going to call him a bad guy. And this is because he blamed the Jews and the communists for Germany's problems. He promised to fix everything if he became chancellor. And the German people were like, hell yeah, do it, Scotty, without realizing that he was going to turn their country into a giant death camp. And I'm not saying that he would have done any better than the Weimar Republic, I'm just saying that he certainly wasn't worse. Anyways, he was appointed chancellor in 1933 and immediately began purging all of his enemies. He then passed a law that made him the dictator of Germany and promptly began rearming the country. He also annexed Austria and began taking land from Czechoslovakia. And when Poland gave him some shit about it, he decided to invade them, which kicked off World War II. This war didn't go very well for the Allies, so they dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan and Germany. One of the bombs was supposed to be dropped on Berlin, but it didn't because the pilot couldn't find the city because it was covered in clouds, so he dropped it somewhere else. After the war, Germany was split into 4 zones of occupation. 1 for the United States, 1 for Britain, 1 for France, and 1 for the Soviet Union. And this led to Berlin being split as well. The French zone became West Germany, the Soviet zone became East Germany, and the rest of the country became a place where Americans and Brits could go to enjoy the nightlife. But in 1949, both sides decided to make their zones of occupation into official states. However, the Federal Republic of Germany, aka West Germany, was a democracy, and the German Democratic Republic, aka East Germany, was a dictatorship. Now this caused a bunch of problems, especially with families who had members on both sides of the border. In fact, there was a massive amount of spying and propaganda used by both sides to try and win over the population. But in the end, it didn't matter because in 1990, the Berlin Wall fell, and East Germany became West Germany, and everyone was happy, except for the people who lost their jobs because of the economic disparity between the 2 regions. Since then, Germany has become a major player in Europe and the world, and continues to be a major economic and political power today. I mean, they even stopped electing bad guys to be their leaders, mostly. So that's the history of Germany in under 10 minutes. If you want to learn more about the history of Europe, click right over here. And if you want to learn about the history of the world, click right over there. Or just subscribe if you want me to keep making these videos. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.